Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the opening ceremony for the World Leaders Summit of COP26. Please welcome Scottish small piper Bríche Heimbull from the Isle of Skye, performing her own arrangement of the traditional melodies An Lamris and Harris dance.
It's possible that there's only one civilization in the Milky Way galaxy. There may only have ever been one, and there may only ever be one. And that's us. We may be the first and last. That's important. If you're looking for a hint as to how we should behave politically, towards each other, towards our planet, then this idea matters. Imagine that the Earth is the only place in a galaxy where intelligent life exists. The only place where collections of atoms as old as time have come together into improbable patterns that can think and feel and bring meaning to an otherwise meaningless universe. How should we behave? Surely, notwithstanding the fact that we're tiny, fragile things on a mote of dust, orbiting around one star amongst 400 billion, we must consider ourselves and our world to be inconceivably valuable.
With her poem written for COP26, we are joined by writer, performer and storyteller Yersa Daly Ward.
doing blue. We are human, and we owe our home. Let's pay our home dues. These are the implications, so we have to end with the facts. Anything less than your best is too much to pay. Anything later than now is too little, too late. Nothing will change without you.
Please welcome the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to COP. Welcome to Glasgow and to Scotland, whose most globally famous fictional son is almost certainly a man called James Bond, who generally comes to the climax of his highly lucrative films strapped to a doomsday device, desperately trying to work out which coloured wire to pull to turn it off, while a red digital clock ticks down remorselessly to a detonation that will end human life as we know it. And we are in roughly the same position, my fellow global leaders, as James Bond today. Except that the tragedy is, this is not a movie. And the doomsday device is real. And the clock is ticking to the furious rhythm of hundreds of billions of pistons and turbines and furnaces and engines with which we are pumping carbon into the air faster and faster, record outputs, and quilting the earth in an invisible and suffocating blanket of CO2. Raising the temperature of the planet with a speed and an abruptness that is entirely man-made. And we know what the scientists tell us, and we have learned not to ignore them. 2 degrees more, and we jeopardize the food supply for hundreds of millions of people as crops wither, locusts swarm. 3 degrees. And you can add more wildfires and cyclones, twice as many, 5 times as many droughts, and 36 times as many heat waves. 4 degrees, and we say goodbye to whole cities. Miami, Alexandria, Shanghai, all lost beneath the waves. And the longer we fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act, because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow. I was there with many of you in Copenhagen 11 years ago when we acknowledged we had a problem. I was there in Paris 6 years ago when we agreed to net zero and to try to restrain the rise in the temperature of the planet to 1.5 degrees. And all those promises will be nothing but blah, 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 to coin a phrase. And the anger and the impatience of the world will be uncontainable unless we make this COP26 in Glasgow the moment when we get real about climate change. And we can. We can get real on coal, cars, cash, and trees. We have the technology to deactivate that ticking doomsday device, not all at once. I'm afraid it's too late for that. But one by one, and with ever greater speed and efficiency, we can begin to close down those billions of hydrocarbon combustion chambers that you find currently in every corner of the planet. We can phase out the use of cars with hydrocarbon internal combustion engines. By 2035, we can do that. We in the UK are leading by ending new sales by 2030. We can end the use of coal-fired power stations. We can do it by 2040 in the developing world, 2030 in the richer nations. We can plant hundreds of millions of trees, 1 trillion. It's not technologically difficult. And halt and reverse deforestation by 2030. Not just because it's a spiritually uplifting and beautiful thing to do, but because that is the way to restore the balance of nature and to fix carbon in the air. And as we look at the green industrial revolution that's now needed around the world, we in the developed world must recognize the special responsibility we have to help everybody else to do it. Because it was here in Glasgow 250 years ago that James Watt came up with a machine that was powered by steam, that was produced by burning coal. And yes, my friends, we've brought you to the very place where the doomsday machine began to tick. And even though for 200 years the industrialized countries were in complete ignorance of the problem that they were creating, we now have a duty to find those funds. $100 billion a year that was promised in Paris by 2020, but which we won't deliver until 2023, to help the rest of the world to move to green technology. But we cannot and will not succeed by government spending alone. We in this room can deploy hundreds of billions, no question. But the market has hundreds of trillions. And the task now is to work together to help our friends to decarbonize, using our funds, the funds we have in development assistance, and working with all the multilateral development banks so that in the key countries that need to make progress, we can jointly identify the projects that we can help to de-risk so that the private sector money can come in just the same way that it was the private sector that enabled the UK to end our dependence on coal, become the Saudi Arabia of wind. We have the technology. We can find the finance, and we must. And the question for us all today is whether we have the will. And my fellow leaders, as I look around this room, I don't want to put too fine a point on it, but you know, we all talk about what we're going to do in 2050 or 2060. I don't think it will escape the notice of the crowds of young people outside, the billions who are watching around the world, half of the population of the world under 30, that the average age of this conclave of world leaders, I'm afraid to say, is over 60. I fully intend to be alive in 2060. I will be a mere 94 years old, even if I'm not still in Downing Street. But you never know. But the children who will judge us are children not yet born, and their children. And we are now coming center stage before a vast and uncountable audience of posterity, and we mustn't fluff our lines or miss our cue, because if we fail, they will not forgive us. They will know that Glasgow was the historic turning point when history failed to turn. They will judge us with bitterness and with a resentment that eclipses any of the climate activists of today. And they will be right. COP26 will not and cannot be the end of the story on climate change. Even if this conference ends with binding global commitments for game-changing, real-world action, 2 weeks from now, smokestacks will still belch in industrial heartlands. Cows will still belch in their pastures, even if some brilliant Kiwi scientists are teaching them how to be more polite. Cars, powered by petrol and diesel, will still choke congested roads in the world's great cities. No one conference could ever change that. If summits alone solved climate change, then we wouldn't have needed 25 previous COP summits to get where we are today. But while COP26 will not be the end of climate change, it can and it must mark the beginning of the end. In the years since Paris, the world has slowly and with great effort and pain built a lifeboat for humanity. And now is the time to give that lifeboat a mighty shove into the water, like some great liner rolling down the slipways of the Clyde. Take a sextant sighting on 1.5 degrees and set off on a journey to a cleaner, greener future. So let us therefore, in the next days, devote ourselves to this extraordinary task, so that we not only continue with a program that is of green industrial revolution that is already creating millions of high-wage, high-skilled jobs in power and technology, taking our economies forward. Let us also do enough to save our planet and our way of life. And as we work, let us think about those billions of beady eyes that are watching us around the world, increasingly edgy and disenchanted. And let us think of the billions more of the unborn, whose anger will be all the greater if we fail. We cannot let them down. We have the ideas, we have the technology, we have the bankers, we have the corporations and the NGOs, we have the interpreters, we have the meeting rooms. If all else fails, we have the unbeatable hospitality and refreshment of Glasgow. We may not feel much like James Bond, not all of us necessarily look like James Bond, but we have the opportunity and we have the duty to make this summit the moment when humanity finally began, and I stress began, to defuse that bomb, and to make this the moment when we began irrefutably to turn the tide and to begin the fight back against climate change. Yes, it's going to be hard, but yes, we can do it. And so let's get to work with all the creativity and imagination and goodwill that we possess. Thank you very much, and good luck to all of us. Thank you.
Bringing voices from Earth into COP26, please welcome climate campaigner Brianna Fruin.
When I was a little girl, I was taught the importance and impact of words. In my culture, in Samoa, there's a proverb that goes, "E pala ma'a ai le pala upu." It means that even stones decay, but words remain. A lesson in knowing how words can be wielded, how text can change everything, how each word you use is weighted, how switching one word or number could reframe worlds, how climate action can be vastly different from climate justice, how 2 degrees could mean the end and 1.5 could mean a fighting chance. You all have the power here today to be better, to remember that in your meeting rooms and drafting documents are more than just black and white objects, to remember that in your words you wield the weapons that can save us or sell us out. I don't need to remind you the reality of vulnerable communities. If you're here today, you know what climate change is doing to us. You don't need my pain or my tears to know that we're in a crisis. The real question is whether you have the political will to do the right thing, to wield the right words, and to follow it up with long overdue action. If you're looking for inspiration on this, look no further than the climate leadership of young Pacific people. We are not just victims to this crisis. We have been resilient beacons of hope. Pacific youth have rallied behind the cry, "We are not drowning, we are fighting." This is our warrior cry to the world. We are not drowning, we are fighting. This is my message from Earth to COP. I hope you remember my words today and look closely at your words as you go throughout COP, because e pala ma'a ai le pala upu. Thank you. Now please welcome to the stage Chai Sudoi.
My name is Chai Surui. I'm 1 in 24, but my people have been living in the Amazon forest at least 6,000 years. My father, the great chief Almi Surui, taught me that we must listen to the stars, the moon, the wind, the animals, and the trees. Today, the climate is warming, the animals are disappearing, the rivers are dying, and our plants don't flower like they did before. The earth is speaking. She tells us that we have no more time. A friend asked me, will we continue to think that today's injuries can be resolved with ointments and painkillers, even though we know that tomorrow our wounds will only run deeper? We need a different path, and with bold and global changes. It's not 2030 or 2050, it's now. While you are closing your eyes to reality, the land defender Ariel Wewawau, my friend since I was a kid, was murdered for protecting the forest. Indigenous peoples are in the front line of the climate emergence, and we must be at the center of the decisions happening here. We have ideas to postpone the end of the world. Let us stop emptying lies and fake promises. Let us end the pollution of hollow words, and let us fight for a livable future and present. It's always necessary to believe the dream is possible. May our utopia be a future on Earth. Thank you.
Please welcome the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres.
Dear Prime Minister Boris Johnson, I want to thank you and to thank COP President Alok Sharma for your hospitality, your leadership, and your tireless efforts in the preparation of this COP. Your Royal Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the 6 years since the Paris Climate Agreement have been the 6 hottest years on record. Our addiction to fossil fuels is pushing humanity to the brink. We face a stark choice. Either we stop it or it stops us. And it's time to say, enough. Enough of brutalizing biodiversity. Enough of killing ourselves with carbon. Enough of treating nature like a toilet. Enough of burning and drilling and mining our way deeper. We are digging our own graves. Our planet is changing before our eyes, from the ocean depths to mountain tops, from melting glaciers to relentless extreme weather events. Sea level rise is double the rate it was 30 years ago. Oceans are hotter than ever and getting warmer faster. Parts of the Amazon rainforest now emit more carbon than they absorb. Recent climate action announcements might give the impression that we are on track to turn things around. This is an illusion. The last published report on national determined contributions showed that they would still condemn the world to a calamitous 2.7-degree increase. And even if the recent pledges were clear and credible, and there are serious questions about some of them, we are still careening towards climate catastrophe. Even in the best-case scenario, temperatures will rise well above 2 degrees. So, as we open this much-anticipated climate conference, we are still heading for climate disaster. Young people know it. Every country sees it. Small island developing states and other vulnerable ones live it. And for them, failure is not an option. Failure is a death sentence. Excellencies, we face a moment of truth. We are fast approaching tipping points that will trigger escalating feedback loops of global heating. But investing in the net zero climate resilient economy will create feedback loops of its own, virtuous circles of sustainable growth, jobs, and opportunity. We have progress to build upon. A number of countries have made credible commitments to net zero emissions by mid-century. Many have pulled the plug on international financing of coal. Over 700 cities are leading the way to carbon neutrality, and the private sector is waking up. The Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, the gold standard for credible commitments and transparent targets, is managing $10 trillion in assets and catalyzing change across industries. The Climate Action Army, led by young people, is unstoppable. They are larger, they are louder, and I assure you, they are not going away, and I stand with them. Excellencies, the science is clear. We know what to do. First, we must keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. This requires greater ambition on mitigation and the immediate concrete action to reduce global emissions by 45% by 2030. G20 countries have a particular responsibility as they represent around 80% of emissions. According to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, in light of national circumstances, developed countries must lead the effort. But emerging economies too must go the extra mile, as their contribution is essential for the effective reduction of emissions. We need maximum ambition from all countries on all fronts to make Glasgow a success. I urge developed countries and the emerging economies to build coalitions to create the financial and technological conditions to accelerate the decarbonization of the economy as well as the phase-out of coal. These coalitions are meant to support the large emitters that face more difficulties in the transition from grey to green, for them to be able to do it. Let's have no illusions. If commitments fall short by the end of this COP, countries must revisit their national climate plans and policies, not every 5 years, every year, every moment, until keeping to 1.5 degrees is assured, until subsidies to fossil fuels end, until there is a price on carbon, until coal is phased out. But we also need greater clarity. There is a deficit of credibility and a surplus of confusion over emissions reductions and net zero targets with different meanings and different metrics. That is why, beyond the mechanisms already established in the Paris Agreement, I'm announcing today that we'll establish a group of experts to propose clear standards to measure and analyze net zero commitments from non-state actors. Second, we must do more to protect vulnerable communities from the clear and present dangers of climate change. Over the last decade, nearly 4 billion people suffered climate-related disasters. That devastation will only grow. But adaptation works. Early warning systems save lives. Climate-smart agriculture and infrastructure save jobs. And all donors must allocate half their climate finance to adaptation. And public and multilateral development banks should start as soon as possible. Third, this COP must be a moment of solidarity. The $100 billion a year climate finance commitment in support of developing countries must become a 100 billion climate finance reality. And this is critical to restoring trust and credibility. I welcome the efforts led by Canada and Germany to help us get there. It is an important first step, but it delays the largest support for years, and it doesn't give clear guarantees. And beyond 100 billion, developing countries need far greater resources to fight COVID-19, to build resilience and pursue sustainable development. Those suffering the most, namely least developed countries and small island developing states, need urgent funding. More public climate finance, more overseas development aid, more grants, easier access to funding. And multilateral development banks must work much more seriously at mobilizing greater investment through blended and private finance. Excellencies, the sirens are sounding. Our planet is talking to us and telling us something. And so are people everywhere. Climate action tops the list of people's concerns across countries, age, and gender. We must listen, and we must act, and we must choose wisely. On behalf of these and future generations, I urge you, choose ambition, choose solidarity, choose to safeguard our future and save humanity. And I thank you.
There will now be a short film, a message from our planet to all of us, Earth to COP.
Commuter chaos this morning and delays for the day as high levels of water brought services to a standstill. The Met Office says we should be braced for more of this. Forget summer, they say. It's going to...
evidence in the record now is becoming clearer and clearer.
No longer assume the temperature of the world is stable.
Более 70 лет, но все еще загрязненность воздуха остается основной.
And for the average American, that carbon footprint is about 16 tons of carbon emissions.
What about COP26? What is COP?
Potential threats to the surrounding natural environment.
You can see the ocean becoming more acid of what the UN is calling the world's first climate change famine.
記録的な暑さだとか、あとは危険な暑さだっていうのが
Periods of early frost, the frequency of hurricanes.
If the scientists are correct in their fears and predictions,
It's a sure sign of climate change.
I'm sorry. No, don't be sorry.
And that's because the more we take, the less there is for future generations.
Even on our warming planet, there are reasons for hope.
We need to have the courage to try.
A lot more jobs created in the green economy.
Climate change is not the problem. Climate change is the expression of the problem.
The renewable energy technologies to fundamentally transform the energy system are at our disposal.
So how do we begin the process of reversing global warming?
Oh my God, the storm.
We need innovation, and this kind of innovation.
I'm really glad people are starting to buy electric cars and
launched the largest tree plantation campaign.
It is now cheaper to build offshore wind farms.
To develop a climate-altering crop.
By continually reinvesting in our grassland, we are locking down more nitrogen.
This is a critical moment that we cannot not be part of.
Enormous opportunity in our agriculture.
We can become stubborn optimists.
COP26 is one of the most important diplomatic gatherings in history.
But humanity already knows what to do.
We can't do it overnight, but we can set that end date.
We've got a long way to go.
But there is momentum.
Roll up your sleeves and do it.
Your Royal Highnesses, Your Excellencies, Lords, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us just how devastating a global cross-border threat can be. Climate change and biodiversity loss are no different. In fact, they pose an even greater existential threat, to the extent that we have to put ourselves on what might be called a warlike footing. Having myself had the opportunity of consulting many of you over these past 18 months, I know you all carry a heavy burden on your shoulders, and you do not need me to tell you that the eyes and hopes of the world are upon you to act with all dispatch and decisively, because time has quite literally run out. The recent IPCC report gave us a clear diagnosis of the scale of the problem. We know what we must do. With a growing global population creating ever-increasing demand on the planet's finite resources, we have to reduce emissions urgently and take action to tackle the carbon already in the atmosphere, including from coal-fired power stations. Putting a value on carbon, thus making carbon capture solutions more economical, is therefore absolutely critical. Similarly, after billions of years of evolution, nature is our best teacher. In this regard, restoring natural capital, accelerating nature-based solutions, and leveraging the circular bioeconomy will be vital to our efforts. As we tackle this crisis, our efforts cannot be a series of independent initiatives running in parallel. The scale and scope of the threat we face call for a global systems-level solution based on radically transforming our current fossil fuel-based economy to one that is genuinely renewable and sustainable. So, ladies and gentlemen, my plea today is for countries to come together to create the environment that enables every sector of industry to take the action required. We know this will take trillions, not billions of dollars. We also know that countries, many of whom are burdened by growing levels of debt, simply cannot afford to go green. Here we need a vast military-style campaign to marshal the strength of the global private sector. With trillions at its disposal, far beyond global GDP, and with the greatest respect, beyond even the governments of the world's leaders, it offers the only real prospect of achieving fundamental economic transition. So, how do we do it? First, how do we get the private sector all pulling in the same direction? After nearly 2 years now of consultation, CEOs have told me that we need to bring together global industries to map out, in very practical terms, what it will take to make the transition. We know from the pandemic that the private sector can speed up timelines dramatically when everyone agrees on the urgency and the direction. So each sector needs a clear strategy to speed up the process of getting innovations to market. Second, who pays and how? We need to align private investment behind these industry strategies to help finance the transition efforts, which means building the confidence of investors so that the financial risk is reduced. Crucially, investment is needed to help transition from coal to clean energy. If we can develop a pipeline of many more sustainable and bankable projects at a sufficient scale, it will attract greater investment. Third, which switches do we flick to enable these objectives? More than 300 of the world's leading CEOs and institutional investors have told me that alongside the promises countries have made, their nationally determined contributions, they need clear market signals, agreed globally, so that they have the confidence to invest without the goalposts suddenly moving. This is the framework I've offered in the Terracotta Roadmap, created by my Sustainable Markets Initiative, with nearly 100 specific actions for acceleration. Together, we are working to drive trillions of dollars in support of transition across 10 of the most emitting and polluting industries. They include energy, agriculture, transportation, health systems, and fashion. The reality of today's global supply chains means that industry transition will affect every country and every producer in the world. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the private sector is ready to play its part and to work with governments to find a way forward. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, many of your countries I know are already feeling the devastating impact of climate change through ever-increasing droughts, mudslides, floods, hurricanes, cyclones and wildfires, as we've just seen on that terrifying film. Any leader who has had to confront such life-threatening challenges knows that the cost of inaction is far greater than the cost of prevention. So I can only urge you, as the world's decision makers, to find practical ways of overcoming differences so we can all get down to work together to rescue this precious planet and save the threatened future of our young people. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Please welcome the COP26 People's Advocate, who has dedicated his lifetime to highlighting the beauty of the natural world, Sir David Attenborough.
Your Excellencies, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, as you spend the next 2 weeks debating, negotiating, persuading and compromising, as you surely must, it's easy to forget that ultimately the emergency climate comes down to a single number: the concentration of carbon in our atmosphere. The measure that greatly determines global temperature. And the changes in that one number is the clearest way to chart our own story, for it defines our relationship with our world. For much of humanity's ancient history, that number bounced wildly between 180 and 300. And so too did global temperatures. It was a brutal and unpredictable world. At times, our ancestors existed only in tiny numbers. But just over 10,000 years ago, that number suddenly stabilized, and with it, Earth's climate. We found ourselves in an unusually benign period, with predictable seasons and reliable weather. For the first time, civilization was possible, and we wasted no time in taking advantage of that. Everything we've achieved in the last 10,000 years was enabled by the stability during this time. The global temperature has not wavered over this period by more than plus or minus 1 degree Celsius. Until now. Our burning of fossil fuels, our destruction of nature, our approach to industry, construction and learning are releasing carbon into the atmosphere at an unprecedented pace and scale. We are already in trouble. The stability we all depend on is breaking. This story is one of inequality as well as instability. Today, those who've done the least to cause this problem are being the hardest hit. Ultimately, all of us will feel the impact, some of which are now unavoidable.
My world is melting.
You think you have control, we actually have no control.
I'm absolutely terrified to bring a child to this world.
Is this how our story is due to end? A tale of the smartest species doomed by that all-too-human characteristic of failing to see the bigger picture in pursuit of short-term goals. Perhaps the fact that the people most affected by climate change are no longer some imagined future generation, but young people alive today. Perhaps that will give us the impetus we need to rewrite our story, to turn this tragedy into a triumph. We are, after all, the greatest problem solvers to have ever existed on Earth. We now understand this problem. We know how to stop the number rising and put it in reverse. We must have carbon emissions, halt them this decade. We must recapture billions of tons of carbon from the air. We must fix our sights on keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. A new industrial revolution, powered by millions of sustainable innovations, is essential and is indeed already beginning. We will all share in the benefits: affordable clean energy, healthy air, and enough food to sustain us all. Nature is a key ally. Wherever we restore the wild, it will recapture carbon and help us bring back balance to our planet. And as we work to build a better world, we must acknowledge no nation has completed its development because no advanced nation is yet sustainable. All have a journey still to complete, so that all nations have a good standard of living and a modest footprint. We're going to have to learn together how to achieve this, ensuring none are left behind. We must use this opportunity to create a more equal world, and our motivation should not be fear, but hope.
Can we fix climate problem in one generation? My answer would be yes, we have to.
We need to not just to talk about what we can do, but to do what we can.
This is a challenge that we should try to solve in a quick way with a long-term vision.
It comes down to this: the people alive now are the generation to come. Will look at this conference and consider one thing: did that number stop rising and start to drop as a result of commitments made here? There's every reason to believe that the answer can be yes. If, working apart, we are force powerful enough to destabilize our planet, surely, working together, we are powerful enough to save it. In my lifetime, I've witnessed a terrible decline. In yours, you could and should witness a wonderful recovery. That desperate hope, ladies and gentlemen, delegates, excellencies, is why the world is looking to you and why you are here. Thank you.